The town of Snow Pine was just getting used to the calm after past alien visits. The residents went about their winter business. Some were skiing, some were drinking hot chocolate by the fireplace, and the children were making snowmen. Everything was going perfectly, until a loud rumbling sound came out of the sky again. There it was, Jim sighed, watching as a silver boot appeared in the sky. What do they want this time? The ship landed right in the center of the town, raising a fountain of snow. Familiar figures appeared on the way out: Bob, Steve, Phil and the others. This time they were dressed in strange costumes that looked like a mixture of winter jackets and spacesuits. "Snowpine, hello!" shouted Bob. "We've come back to learn how to make snowmen." Mary, standing outside her cafe, nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Snowmen?" she asked as she stepped outside. "You came halfway across the galaxy to make snowmen?" "Yes," Steve confirmed cheerfully. "We've learned that it's an important Earth tradition. We need to understand how it works." "Well, hang on, then," Jim muttered. "This is going to be a disaster." The aliens started with the most obvious thing, trying to figure out what snow is. "Is it frozen water?" Phil said thoughtfully, holding a snowball in his hand. "Yes, and we make shapes out of it," Jim explained. Bob began to roll the snowball with enthusiasm, but instead of a ball he got a triangle. "What's that?" Jim was surprised. "It's our interpretation," Bob said proudly. "We think triangles are much more aerodynamic." Meanwhile, Steve gathered a pile of snow into a pile, attached a carrot on top, and announced, "Done. It's a snowman, right?" "No," Jim replied dryly. "It's just a carrot stuck in a snowdrift." The local children watching all this began to giggle. After failing with his hands, Bob decided to apply science. "We're going to use our alien shaping module," he announced, pulling out a strange device that resembled a mixer. Bob turned the device on and it began to gather snow around it, creating a giant block of snow. "It must be a body," he proudly proclaimed. "It's not a body, it's a snow tank," Mary remarked, looking at the monster of snow that took up half the area. "Okay, a little too much," Phil admitted, watching as the snow giant began to collapse under its own weight. "All right, let's forget about technology," Jim said. "Let's try it the old-fashioned way." This time the aliens split into groups. Bob and Steve did the body, Phil and the others did the head, and Lonely Tony decided to accessorize. An hour later, a strange snowman stood in the square. His body was made up of perfect geometric shapes, balls, cubes, and one random cylinder. The head was slightly elongated and resembled a pineapple. Instead of a nose, it was not a carrot, but a real antenna that glowed with green light. The eyes were compact screens on which videos from past visits were playing. "Well, that's definitely creative," Mary said, trying not to laugh. "We'll call it Snow 9000. Bob said proudly. When the snowman was complete, the aliens suggested a new game, Snowball Fight. "We want to test how well the snowmen can withstand an attack," Bob explained. The game began, but instead of regular snowballs, the aliens started using strange snow-throwing devices. These devices shot snowballs at the speed of light, turning everything around them into a white storm. "Stop!" Jim shouted. "This isn't a snowball fight, this is a snow apocalypse." When the snow finally settled, half of the Snow 9000 was destroyed and Jim looked like he was buried in a snowdrift. On the third day, Jim decided to take matters into his own hands. He showed the aliens how to mold a regular snowman: 3 balls, a carrot, charcoals for eyes, and an old hat. The aliens were delighted. "It's so simple and beautiful," Bob marveled. "Sometimes simplicity is all you need," Jim replied tiredly. The aliens made dozens of ordinary snowmen all over the city. Each one was adorned with a small antenna to keep in touch with space. When it was time to leave, Bob walked up to Jim and handed him a small snow alien. "This is a gift from us. We named him Snow Bob." "Thank you," Jim said, smiling. "I hope you won't add any more engines to the snowmen." "We'll think about it," Bob replied with a wide grin. The ship took off, leaving the sign behind it, "Thank you for teaching us earthly arts. Next time, ice sculptures." Mary looked at Jim. "Okay, who's going to be first in the ice class?" Jim shook his head. "Not me." It was only a few weeks after the snowman epic when the residents of Snow Pine heard the familiar rumble over the town again. Jim, sitting by the fireplace with a cup of cocoa, nearly dropped the mug. "No. They're here again, aren't they?" he moaned, looking out the window. The ship looked even stranger this time. Its hull was covered in patterns that looked like ice cracks, and a light bluish light was emanating from it. "Good afternoon, Earthlings." Bob's voice sounded as the aliens entered the square. This time they were dressed in shiny silver suits labeled, "Art Mission 9000. "What is it this time?" asked Mary, who was no longer surprised by the sudden visits. "We want to master your earthly art of making ice sculptures," Bob announced proudly. Jim looked at him as if he had just announced that he was going to build an ice Eiffel Tower. "I knew it," he muttered. "The ice epic begins." The aliens began by studying ice. "This is solid water, right?" Steve asked, examining a piece of ice under the microscope they had brought with them. "Yeah, just don't break it," Jim warned. 5 minutes later, things didn't go according to plan. "We've got a broken piece of ice," said Bob. "How?" Jim asked. "We tried to heat it with a laser to make it more malleable. Are you serious?" Jim covered his face with his hands. "Ice and lasers are not compatible." The next day, the aliens began to create. Each chose a block of ice, tools, and, of course, their own strange alien gadgets, and set to work. Bob, as always, decided to go the furthest. His sculpture was something he called an intergalactic masterpiece. It was actually a giant ball of ice with antennae sticking out and random patterns that periodically glowed. "What is it?" Mary asked cautiously. "It's a symbol of communication between galaxies," Bob declared proudly. "It's a symbol that you've attracted electricity back to the ice," remarked Jim. "And it might explode." Meanwhile, Steve decided to make a statue of a man. The result looked like a giant cube figure that resembled Steve only in Steve's own imagination. "That's me," he said, pointing to his sculpture. "It's more like a refrigerator," Phil answered honestly. After a series of failures, the aliens turned to their technology again. "We've created an ultra-cold cutter," Steve said, showing off a device that resembled a small flamethrower, only with a blue flame. "Please don't use this in the square," Jim asked. "Too late," Bob replied cheerfully. They turned on the torch, and in a minute half of their ice had turned into a giant puddle. "This isn't working," Jim sighed. "It's an experimental process." Bob insisted. After all the failures, the aliens decided to unite and create something grand, an ice mini-city. "We're gonna build a replica of Snow Pine," announced Bob. The project began with enthusiasm. They carefully carved out houses, bridges, and even little statues of people. Everything seemed to be going well until Steve decided to make a skating rink around the town using his torch. "This is going to be perfect," he shouted, running with the torch around the icy houses. But the ice cracked and the mini-city collapsed, turning into a huge chaotic chunk of ice. "This is a disaster," Jim sighed. "It's modern art," Bob said proudly. Despite the chaos, the aliens decided to celebrate their project. They organized an ice party, decorating the ruined mini-city with glowing antennas and garlands. Residents of Snow Pine were invited to the party. Children rode on chunks of ice like slides, adults drank hot chocolate, and Bob danced to strange alien music. "Well, at least it's fun," Mary admitted. "I just hope they don't decide to come back in the summer to build sandcastles," Jim said. Bob gave Jim an ice ball with a small replica of their mini-city inside. "This is our gift so you'll always remember us," he said. "As if we could forget you," Jim muttered, smiling. The ship took off, leaving a sign. "Thank you for teaching US ice art. Next time, Earth's beaches and sand art." "Beaches?" Jim moaned. Mary smiled. "It looked like we were going to have a hot summer." Bob sighed, but agreed. The slope was filled with participants, locals, aliens, and even a couple of tourists who had heard about the crazy races at Snow Pine. The race started, and the entire slope filled with shouting, laughing, and the rumble of sleds. Bob, of course, lost. His sled flipped over again. The winner was 8-year-old Susie, who was just quietly riding her wooden sled and happened to cross the finish line first. When it was time to depart, Snow Pine residents gathered again in the center square. "Thanks for another memorable adventure," said Jim, shaking Bob's hand. "Thank you for the lessons," Bob replied. "Next time we will come in the summer. We learned what surfing is and we want to try it." The crowd froze. "I'm on vacation in the summer," Jim muttered and disappeared into the crowd. A last laugh came from the ship and the aliens departed, leaving a sign. "See you in summer. We love Earth." Mary looked at the sign and laughed. "So, are we getting ready to surf?" The townspeople responded with glee. "No,